The morning sun had barely touched the rooftops of the small town of McKenna when something unusual happened. People would later say it was the strangest day they had ever witnessed. Some laughed about it, some shook their heads in disbelief, and others still tell the story as if it happened only yesterday. Because on that ordinary morning, a man who had spent most of his life doing one thing suddenly woke up and made a decision that nobody expected. His name was Daniel Okoro. For years, Daniel was known as the quiet man who sat under the old mango tree near the town market, fixing broken radios, fans, and small household items. He was patient, hardworking, and honest, but life had never been easy for him. Customers came and went, money was always short, and despite all his efforts, Daniel felt as though he was standing still while the world moved forward. Many people in McKenna admired his kindness, but very few believed he would ever become anything more than the man who repaired old things. Daniel lived with his wife, Miriam, and their 2 children in a simple house at the edge of town. Every evening when the power failed, as it often did, the family sat in darkness, waiting for electricity to return. The outages frustrated everyone. Shops closed early, children struggled to study, and business owners lost money every week. One night, while sitting outside beneath the stars, Daniel listened as his neighbors complained. "If only we had skilled electricians here," one man said. "We always wait days for someone from the city," another replied. Daniel remained silent, but something about those words stayed in his mind. That same night he could not sleep. He kept thinking about the flickering lights, the broken wires, and the struggles people faced every day. He thought about his children and the future he wanted for them. Most importantly, he wondered if it was too late to learn something new. Then, just before sunrise, Daniel made a decision. He would become an electrician. When he told Miriam, she stared at him in surprise. "An electrician?" she asked gently. "But you've never done electrical work before." Daniel smiled quietly. "I know," he said. "But every expert was once a beginner." The news spread quickly through McKenna. People laughed. "Daniel? An electrician?" One shopkeeper joked. "He is too old to start again," another said. Others simply shook their heads. They believed he was chasing an impossible dream. But Daniel ignored the voices around him. Every morning, he traveled to a nearby town to learn from an experienced electrician named Mr. Kamau. He spent long hours studying wires, circuits, switches, and safety rules. He practiced connecting lights, fixing sockets, and understanding how electricity moved through buildings. It was not easy. Sometimes he made mistakes. Sometimes he returned home tired and discouraged. Yet every day he learned something new. Weeks turned into months. Slowly Daniel changed. The man who once repaired radios under the mango tree was becoming someone entirely different. Then one afternoon an opportunity came. A small grocery shop in McKenna lost power. The owner, worried about spoiled food and lost customers, asked Daniel if he could help. People gathered outside to watch. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they expected him to fail. Daniel walked into the shop carrying only a small toolbox. He carefully inspected the wires, checked the switches, and examined the old electrical panel. The crowd whispered among themselves. "Do you think he knows what he is doing?" "I don't think so. This will be interesting." Daniel remained calm. After several minutes he made a repair. Suddenly the lights came back on. The refrigerator started humming. The fans began turning. The shop owner smiled with relief. For a moment the entire crowd stood in silence. Nobody expected Daniel to succeed. But that was only the beginning. Soon more people started calling him. A school needed repairs. A farmer wanted new lighting installed. A family needed help after a dangerous electrical fault damaged part of their home. Every job Daniel completed surprised people even more. The same customers who once doubted him now spoke about him with respect. Yet Daniel noticed something strange. On some jobs he found wires placed in unusual ways. Connections hidden behind walls. Electrical problems that did not seem accidental. At first he ignored these signs. But as the days passed he realized there was a pattern. Someone in McKenna had been creating dangerous electrical problems, and people did not know it. One evening, while repairing an old building on the edge of town, Daniel discovered something hidden behind a wall. He froze. His hands stopped moving. What he found made no sense at all. And in that moment, Daniel understood that becoming an electrician had led him into a mystery far greater than anyone could have imagined. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Who was behind it? And why? Daniel stood motionless behind the old wall, staring at the strange electrical connection he had just uncovered. The small flashlight in his hand shook slightly, not because he was afraid, but because he could not understand what he was looking at. The wiring was not part of the original installation. Someone had added it later, carefully hiding it behind the wall. He leaned closer and examined every connection. "This doesn't belong here," he whispered. The building was an old storage shop that had been empty for several years. Its owner, Mr. Bacco, had recently decided to reopen it. He had asked Daniel to inspect the electrical system before workers began renovating the place. Daniel had expected old wires, damaged sockets, and perhaps a few broken switches. He had not expected this. He carefully took a picture with his phone and stepped away from the wall. For a moment he considered telling Mr. Bacco immediately. Then he remembered something. 3 weeks earlier, while repairing the lights at a small restaurant, he had discovered another unusual connection. At the time, he had assumed it was simply the result of poor electrical work. A few days later he found something similar at a tailor's shop. Now he was beginning to wonder if those incidents were connected. Daniel packed his tools and returned home that evening quieter than usual. Miriam noticed immediately. "You look worried," she said. Daniel placed his toolbox on the floor. "I found something strange today." He explained what had happened. Miriam listened carefully, then asked, "Could it just be old wiring?" "Maybe," Daniel replied. "But I've seen something similar in other places." She looked at him for a few seconds. "Then be careful." Daniel nodded. He knew she was right. The next morning, instead of rushing to his first customer, Daniel visited Mr. Kamau, the electrician who had trained him. Mr. Kamau was an experienced man in his late 60s who had spent most of his life working with electrical systems across the region. Daniel showed him the pictures. Mr. Kamau studied them without saying a word. Finally he looked up. "Where did you find this?" "Inside Mr. Bacco's old shop." Mr. Kamau looked at the photograph again. "Are you sure?" "Yes." The older man placed the phone on the table. "Daniel, some things are better understood before they are discussed with everyone." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Mr. Kamau sighed. "There was a time when this town had serious problems with its electrical system. Years ago, several businesses complained about unexplained power losses. Nothing was ever properly investigated." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Power losses?" "Yes." But the complaints stopped suddenly. "Why?" Mr. Kamau did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to an old wooden cabinet and pulled out a dusty notebook. He opened it carefully. Inside were pages filled with handwritten notes, dates, addresses, and electrical readings. Daniel recognized some of the locations. The restaurant, the tailor's shop, Mr. Bacco's building. His heart began beating faster. "How did you know about these places?" Daniel asked. Mr. Kamau looked toward the window. "I was working in this area many years ago." Daniel turned another page. There were more addresses. Some belonged to homes. Others were small businesses. But all of them appeared to have experienced electrical problems at some point. "What happened?" Daniel asked. Mr. Kamau closed the notebook. "That's what nobody knows." Daniel wanted to ask more, but the older man shook his head. "Don't start accusing people because of wires you don't understand yet. Electrical work requires patience. If you want the truth, you need evidence." Those words stayed with Daniel. For the next several days he began paying closer attention to every job he received. He did not tell his customers what he suspected. Instead, he carefully inspected each electrical system, recorded unusual connections, and kept notes. Then something unexpected happened. A new customer came to his workshop. Her name was Grace. She owned a small beauty salon near the market and had heard that Daniel was becoming one of the most reliable electricians in town. "My lights keep going off," she explained. "Sometimes they work perfectly and sometimes everything suddenly shuts down." Daniel agreed to inspect the salon. When he arrived, he noticed something immediately. The electrical panel looked recently repaired. But the wires inside were old. He carefully checked the connections. Then he saw it. Another unusual wire. It disappeared behind the wall. Daniel felt a cold sensation in his stomach. He followed the line as carefully as possible. It led toward the back of the building. There, hidden behind a wooden cabinet, he found another connection. But this one was different. Someone had deliberately connected two separate electrical lines. Daniel stepped back. Grace watched him. "Is something wrong?" Daniel hesitated. "I need to ask you something." "What?" "Who worked on this wiring before me?" Grace thought for a moment. "I'm not sure. The landlord said someone came here months ago." "Do you know his name?" She shook her head. "No. But I remember something." Daniel waited. "He always came in a dark blue work shirt." Daniel's expression changed. Mr. Kamau had once told him that the best electricians in the area wore identification badges because of safety regulations. But this person apparently had no badge. Daniel asked Grace if she remembered anything else. She pointed toward the back door. He had a small metal toolbox, and there was a symbol painted on it. What kind of symbol? Grace paused. It looked like a lightning bolt inside a circle. Daniel's heart sank. He had seen that symbol before. It was scratched onto the old electrical panel at Mr. Baco's shop. That evening, Daniel returned home and opened the photographs on his phone. He compared every image. The hidden wiring, the old connections, the symbol. Everything seemed connected. But there was one thing Daniel could not explain. Why would someone secretly modify electrical systems across the town? And why had nobody noticed? As Daniel sat in silence, his phone suddenly rang. It was Mr. Kamau. Daniel answered. "Hello, sir?" There was silence on the other end. Then Mr. Kamau spoke in a low voice. "Daniel, don't go to your next customer's house tomorrow." Daniel sat upright. "Why?" "I found something in my old records." "What did you find?" Another long silence followed. Then Mr. Kamau said something that made Daniel's entire body go still. "The symbol you're looking for doesn't belong to an electrician." Before Daniel could ask another question, the call ended. Daniel stared at his phone. For the first time since he decided to become an electrician, he wondered whether his new career had uncovered something that people had spent years trying to hide. Daniel barely slept that night. Mr. Kamau's final words kept replaying in his mind. "The symbol you're looking for doesn't belong to an electrician." What did that mean? Daniel had spent months learning electrical installation, wiring, circuit breakers, safety procedures, and basic troubleshooting. He had never imagined that his new career would lead him into a mystery involving old buildings and hidden electrical connections. By morning he had made up his mind. He would not ignore what he had discovered, but he would also not rush into accusing anyone. His first step was to understand the history of the town. After breakfast, Daniel visited the local market and began speaking with people who had lived there for many years. He asked simple questions about electrical problems, old businesses, and previous electricians. At first, nobody seemed interested. Then an elderly shopkeeper named Mr. Elias suddenly became quiet when Daniel mentioned the lightning bolt symbol. "You have seen that mark?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Where?" "On an electrical panel." Mr. Elias looked around before lowering his voice. "My son, that mark disappeared years ago. I thought nobody remembered it." Daniel's attention sharpened. "What does it mean?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know exactly. But many years ago, a group of technicians used it when they worked on electrical systems around this area." "Technicians?" "Yes. They were not from this town. They came whenever there was a major electrical problem." Daniel waited for more. "They were very skilled," Mr. Elias continued. "But people complained because they would sometimes make changes without explaining anything to the owners." Daniel's mind immediately returned to the hidden wires. Where did they go? Mr. Elias sighed. One day they simply stopped coming. That answer only created more questions. Meanwhile, Daniel's wife, Miriam, had started noticing the change in him. He was still working hard, still helping customers, and still spending time with his children, but his mind seemed somewhere else. One evening, she found him sitting outside with his notebook open. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said. Daniel looked up. "I'm trying to understand something." "Then tell me." He explained what he had learned. Miriam listened carefully. "But Daniel," she said, "you started this work because you wanted to build a better future for our family." "I know. Don't let someone else's mystery take that away from you." Her words touched him. Daniel realized that she was right. He had started learning electrical work because he wanted to provide better opportunities for his children. He wanted people to see that it was never too late to learn a skill and change your life. But now, his ordinary dream had become complicated. The following afternoon, Grace called him. "Daniel, something happened." He immediately asked what was wrong. The lights came back on by themselves. Daniel frowned. "Did anyone repair the system?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes. And there is something else." "What?" Grace lowered her voice. "I found a mark on the back door." Daniel went to the salon. There, near the bottom of the wooden door, was the same lightning bolt symbol. He stared at it. This could no longer be dismissed as an old electrical mistake. Someone had placed that symbol recently. But who? Daniel carefully took a photograph and left. As he walked toward the market, he noticed a man standing across the street. The stranger was wearing a dark blue work shirt. Daniel stopped. The man immediately turned away. Daniel followed him with his eyes, but the crowded street quickly swallowed him. Was it the same person Grace had described? Daniel didn't know. He decided not to follow him. Instead, he returned to Mr. Kamau. The older electrician was waiting for him. You saw him, didn't you? Mr. Kamau asked. Daniel froze. How did you know? Mr. Kamau looked toward the road. Because someone has been watching me too. Daniel sat down. What is happening? Mr. Kamau opened his old notebook again. This time he turned to a page near the back. There were several names written there. Some were crossed out. Others had dates beside them. Daniel recognized one name immediately. Mr. Baco. Another name belonged to Grace's landlord. Daniel looked at Mr. Kamau. These people are connected. Maybe, Mr. Kamau replied. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you involved. Daniel felt frustrated. You trained me. You told me to look for evidence. Now you're telling me to stay away. Mr. Kamau lowered his eyes. I made mistakes when I was younger. What kind of mistakes? The older man remained silent. Daniel waited. Finally, Mr. Kamau said, Years ago, I accepted a job that I should have refused. Daniel leaned forward. What job? Before Mr. Kamau could answer, someone knocked on the door. Both men stopped talking. There was another knock. Slow. Deliberate. Mr. Kamau immediately closed the notebook. Daniel looked at him. Are you expecting someone? No. The knocking came again. Mr. Kamau walked toward the door but did not open it. Who is it? A man's voice came from outside. I need to speak with Daniel. Daniel's heart started pounding. Mr. Kamau looked at him. Do you know him? Daniel shook his head. The voice came again. You should stop asking questions about the old electrical work. Daniel and Mr. Kamau exchanged a nervous glance. The man continued. Some things were left buried for a reason. Then the footsteps moved away. Daniel rushed to the window. He saw a dark blue shirt disappearing around the corner. His mind filled with questions. Why was this stranger warning him? What had Mr. Kamau done years ago? And most importantly, why were the same people and buildings appearing in an old notebook connected to the hidden electrical wiring? That evening, Daniel returned home with a decision. He would continue working. He would continue helping his customers. But from now on, every electrical inspection would be more than a job. It could be a clue. What Daniel didn't know was that someone else had already begun checking his movements. And the next morning, when Daniel opened his toolbox, he discovered something inside that he had never placed there. A small metal badge. On it was the same lightning bolt symbol. And underneath the symbol were 3 words that made his hands go cold. You are next. Daniel stared at the small metal badge inside his toolbox. For several seconds he could not move. The words beneath the lightning bolt symbol seemed to become larger every time he looked at them. You are next. He immediately closed the toolbox. His first thought was his family. Miriam and the children were at home, completely unaware of what had been happening. Daniel suddenly understood that this was no longer just a strange mystery connected to electrical wiring. Someone knew where he worked. Someone knew about his questions. And somehow, that person had entered his workshop. Daniel picked up his phone and called Miriam. Are you and the children okay? She sounded surprised. Yes. Why? Just stay home today. Lock the doors and don't let anyone inside unless you know them. There was a short silence. Daniel, what happened? I'll explain when I get home. He did not want to frighten her over the phone. After the call, Daniel returned to Mr. Kamau. The older man looked at the badge and immediately became pale. I was afraid this would happen, he said. You know what this means. Mr. Kamau nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel placed the badge on the table. Then tell me everything. For a long moment, Mr. Kamau said nothing. Finally, he opened the old notebook. 20 years ago, there was a private electrical maintenance company working in this region. They were hired by businesses, landlords, and sometimes local authorities. They were supposed to inspect electrical systems and improve safety. What happened? They started making unauthorized changes. Daniel listened carefully. Instead of simply repairing faults, they created hidden connections between buildings. Some systems were modified without the owners knowing. Why? Nobody knew for certain. Some people believed it was to control power distribution. Others thought there was money involved. But eventually, several business owners complained. Daniel looked at the list of names. And you? I worked for them. The words landed heavily. Daniel stared at his teacher. You worked for them? For a short time. Did you install those wires? Mr. Kamau looked down. Some of them. Daniel stood up. Then why didn't you tell anyone? I tried. His voice cracked slightly. I realized what was happening too late. When I questioned the people in charge, they told me to stay quiet. I left the company soon afterward. Daniel walked toward the window. All this time, he had believed Mr. Kamau was simply an experienced electrician who had decided to teach him. Now he realized there was an entire part of the man's past he knew nothing about. Why are they coming back now? Mr. Kamau shook his head. I don't know. Daniel looked at the notebook. Maybe they never left. That possibility frightened both men. The next morning, Daniel decided to inspect every location mentioned in the notebook. He did not want to break into any building or interfere with anyone's property. He simply visited customers who had already requested electrical inspections and carefully documented what he found. The pattern became clearer. Several old businesses had unusual wiring. Some had recently experienced unexplained electrical failures. Others had new electrical panels installed by people nobody remembered hiring. And every location seemed connected to the same symbol. Then Daniel noticed something even more disturbing. There was one building mentioned in the notebook that had never been inspected. The old community power station. It had been abandoned years ago. Daniel remembered hearing stories about the building as a child. People rarely went near it because the electrical equipment was outdated and the property had been closed for a long time. According to Mr. Kamau's records, however, the building had been at the center of the old electrical network. Daniel knew he needed to understand what was inside. But he also knew he could not simply walk into an abandoned electrical facility. So he contacted the current property manager and explained that he had discovered old electrical records suggesting the building might contain unsafe wiring. The manager agreed to meet him the following afternoon. Daniel arrived with his safety equipment and remained outside until he received permission to inspect the property. The building looked exactly as he remembered. Broken windows, dust-covered walls, old warning signs, and a large metal door covered with rust. Daniel slowly entered. Inside, the air smelled old and damp. His flashlight moved across the walls. There were wires everywhere. Some were disconnected. Others disappeared into the ceiling. Daniel followed the main electrical panel toward the back room. Then he stopped. There it was. The lightning bolt symbol. But this time, it was not painted on a toolbox or scratched into a panel. It was stamped into a large metal cabinet. Daniel carefully opened it. Inside were rows of old electrical components and handwritten labels. He checked the first label. Then another. His breathing became faster. The labels matched the names in Mr. Kamau's notebook. Daniel took several photographs. Suddenly he heard footsteps. He turned around. Nobody was there. He waited. Another sound came from the hallway. Daniel switched off his flashlight. The room became completely dark. Someone was walking toward him. Slowly. He could hear the footsteps getting closer. Daniel remained still, trying to understand what was happening. Then a voice came from the hallway. Daniel. He recognized it. It was the same man who had warned him outside Mr. Kamau's workshop. Daniel stepped backward. Who are you? The man did not answer. Instead, he said, You should have stopped when you were given the chance. Daniel looked toward the cabinet. His phone was still recording. Why are you doing this? The footsteps stopped. You don't understand what you're looking at. Then explain it. Silence. Daniel suddenly heard another sound from the other side of the building. Someone else was there. The stranger's voice changed. You came here alone? Daniel didn't answer. For the first time, the man sounded worried. Daniel realized something important. The stranger had not expected anyone else to know about this place. Daniel slowly reached for his phone. But before he could move, the lights inside the old building suddenly came on. Every old bulb flickered at once. The entire room lit up. And on the far wall, Daniel saw something that made him forget about the stranger completely. There were dozens of photographs. Pictures of businesses. Pictures of electrical panels. Pictures of people. And among them was one recent photograph of Daniel himself, taken outside his home. Daniel's heart stopped. Someone had been watching his family. He turned toward the doorway. The stranger was standing there. But he was no longer alone. Another person stood behind him. Daniel realized he had walked directly into the center of the mystery. And now there was nowhere obvious to turn. Yet hidden inside that old electrical cabinet was the answer everyone had been searching for. Daniel only needed to reach it before someone stopped him. He took one careful step forward. Then the lights went out again. The darkness came suddenly, leaving Daniel frozen inside the abandoned power station. He could hear his own breathing, along with the faint sound of movement somewhere in the building. For a few seconds nobody spoke. Then Daniel heard a door close in the distance. He reached for his phone and switched on the flashlight. The two men who had been standing near the doorway were gone. Daniel looked around quickly. Where did they go? His voice echoed through the empty room. He turned toward the electrical cabinet. The cabinet was still open. Inside, beneath the old components, he noticed a small metal box he had not seen before. It was partly hidden behind several wires. Daniel carefully pulled it forward. There was no lock. Inside were documents. Old contracts, electrical inspection reports, property records, and photographs. Daniel began flipping through them. His hand stopped when he saw one particular document. It contained a list of buildings connected to the old electrical network. But beside several names was a strange handwritten note. Transfer complete. Daniel didn't understand what it meant. Then he found another document. This one was dated only 3 months earlier. 3 months. The old electrical network was supposedly abandoned years ago. Why was someone still updating the records? Daniel continued reading. Then he saw a familiar name. Mr. Bacco. His heart sank. He quickly searched for Grace's salon. Her building was listed too. Then the restaurant. The tailor's shop. Even several homes. Daniel suddenly understood why these places had experienced strange electrical problems. Someone had been monitoring them. But there was still one question. Who was paying for it? Before Daniel could search further, he heard footsteps again. This time they were coming from behind him. He turned. Mr. Kamau stood in the doorway. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. How did you get here? Mr. Kamau did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the documents in Daniel's hands. You found them. Daniel stepped toward him. You knew about this place. Mr. Kamau lowered his head. I knew it existed. You knew people were still using it. I suspected. Then why didn't you tell me? Mr. Kamau looked at him with tired eyes. Because I was hoping I was wrong. Daniel held up the recent document. These records are only 3 months old. Mr. Kamau took a deep breath. Then we have a bigger problem. Daniel frowned. What? Mr. Kamau pointed toward the photographs. Look at the dates. Daniel checked them. Most of the photographs were old. But some were recent. Very recent. One had been taken just days ago. Another showed Grace standing outside her salon. Another showed Mr. Bacco entering his shop. Then Daniel found a photograph of himself. It was taken the same morning he had started working as an electrician. He looked at Mr. Kamau. They were watching me from the beginning. Mr. Kamau nodded. Maybe not you specifically. What do you mean? Mr. Kamau pointed toward the photograph. Look at what you're holding. Daniel looked down. In the photograph he was carrying his first electrical toolbox. On the side of the toolbox was a small sticker. It had the lightning bolt symbol. Daniel suddenly remembered where the sticker came from. It had been given to him by Mr. Kamau on the first day of his training. Daniel slowly looked at his teacher. Why did you give me this? Mr. Kamau said nothing. The silence was enough. Daniel stepped backward. You knew. I didn't know they would notice you. You put their symbol on my toolbox. I thought it was only an old company mark. Daniel's voice became quieter. Then why are you so afraid? Mr. Kamau looked toward the hallway. Because someone from that company never stopped working. Daniel's eyes widened. Who? Before Mr. Kamau could answer, they heard a vehicle outside. Both men became silent. A car had stopped near the entrance. Daniel quickly put the documents back into the metal box. Mr. Kamau whispered, We need to leave. They moved through a side corridor and reached the back exit. But when Daniel opened the door, he stopped. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Someone had arrived before them. And they had parked at the back. Daniel and Mr. Kamau exchanged a look. They returned inside. This building has another exit, Mr. Kamau whispered. They moved deeper into the old power station. Behind a damaged wooden panel, Mr. Kamau discovered a narrow passage. Daniel looked at him. How did you know about this? I used to work here. The answer created another wave of questions. But there was no time to ask them. They moved through the passage until they reached another room. Inside was a small desk. On the desk sat a modern laptop. Daniel stared at it. Someone had been using the abandoned building recently. The screen was still on. A map of McKenna was displayed. Several locations were marked. Daniel recognized them immediately. Every location where he had recently completed an electrical repair was highlighted. His stomach tightened. Then another marker appeared on the screen. Daniel watched it flash. It was his home. He stepped closer. No. Mr. Kamau looked at the screen. They know where your family lives. Daniel immediately reached for his phone. He called Miriam. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. His heart began racing. Then his phone vibrated. A message had arrived from an unknown number. Daniel opened it. There was only one sentence. Stop looking for the truth. Underneath it was a photograph. Daniel's house. Taken that very morning. Daniel stared at the image. For the first time, the mystery was no longer about old wires, hidden electrical connections, or a forgotten company. His family had become part of it. He looked at Mr. Kamau. We're going home. But Mr. Kamau shook his head. Not yet. Why? The older man pointed toward the laptop. A new file had appeared on the screen. Its name was simple. Daniel Okoro, Final Inspection. Daniel stared at it. Neither man touched the keyboard. Then the file opened by itself. And what appeared on the screen revealed that Daniel's decision to become an electrician may not have been as accidental as he had always believed. Daniel stared at the laptop screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. The file contained his name, his photograph, and a detailed record of his recent electrical work. Every customer he had visited was listed. Every unusual electrical connection he had discovered was marked. But then Daniel noticed something that made his confusion even greater. The file was not created recently. It had been prepared months before he became an electrician. He slowly turned toward Mr. Kamau. What is this? Mr. Kamau closed his eyes. I was hoping you would never find out this way. Daniel stepped closer. You knew about this? Mr. Kamau nodded. Years ago, I discovered that the old electrical company had kept records of people in this town. They were not only tracking buildings. They were looking for someone who could eventually expose what they had done. Daniel looked back at the screen. But why me? Mr. Kamau hesitated. Because your father was one of the people who tried to expose them. Daniel froze. My father? He had never heard this before. His father had passed away when Daniel was young. As far as Daniel knew, he had simply been a hard-working repairman who struggled to provide for his family. Mr. Kamau opened another file. Inside were old photographs of Daniel's father working with electrical equipment. Daniel stared at the images. He was an electrician? Yes, Mr. Kamau said. And he discovered that the company had secretly modified electrical systems across several businesses. He wanted to report it. What happened? He disappeared from the project before he could finish. Daniel felt tears forming in his eyes. All his life, he had wondered why his father had kept so many old electrical tools around the house. Now everything was beginning to make sense. The toolbox, the wiring, the strange symbol. Even the reason Mr. Kamau had encouraged him to learn electrical work. Daniel looked at his teacher. You trained me because of my father. At first, yes, Mr. Kamau admitted. But later, I realized you genuinely had the talent for this work. Suddenly, footsteps echoed through the building. Daniel and Mr. Kamau turned. This time they did not run. They walked toward the main room. The man in the dark blue shirt appeared. Behind him stood another man, but both remained calm. The first man looked at Daniel. You finally found the records. Daniel held the documents tightly. You've been watching my customers. The man nodded. We were trying to protect something that was supposed to remain forgotten. By secretly changing electrical systems? It wasn't about hurting anyone, the man replied. The original system was designed to manage power during shortages. The company made mistakes, and those mistakes were hidden instead of corrected. Daniel shook his head. Then why threaten me? The man looked ashamed. Because people became afraid. Instead of admitting the truth, they protected their reputation. Daniel looked at Mr. Kamau. You knew all of this. I knew part of it, Mr. Kamau said. But I didn't know who was continuing the work. The stranger finally introduced himself. His name was Samuel. He had worked for the original company years ago. He explained that after the company closed, several old employees continued monitoring the electrical systems because they feared that abandoned connections could eventually become dangerous. But instead of reporting everything openly, they worked in secret. That secrecy had created the mystery. It had also created fear. Daniel looked at the old documents. So all these years, people thought someone was stealing electricity. Samuel nodded. Some connections caused power losses. Others were simply old emergency lines. Nobody wanted to admit how badly the system had been managed. Daniel took a deep breath. Then we're going to fix it. Samuel looked surprised. What? We stop hiding it. Daniel knew exactly what had to happen. With Mr. Kamau's help, he documented every suspicious connection. He contacted the proper local authorities and explained what they had discovered. Qualified electrical workers were brought in to inspect the old network properly. For weeks, the town remained focused on the investigation. Old wiring was removed. Unsafe connections were replaced. Electrical panels were repaired. Businesses that had suffered repeated power problems finally received proper electrical inspections. And slowly the mystery began to disappear. There were no secret meetings anymore. No hidden wires. No strange warnings. Just honest electrical work. Daniel became one of the most trusted electricians in McKenna. Customers who had once laughed at him now waited in line for his services. But Daniel never forgot why he had started. One evening he returned home and placed his old toolbox on the table. Miriam smiled. "Do you remember when everyone laughed at you?" Daniel laughed. "I remember. You really woke up one morning and decided to become an electrician." Daniel looked at his children. Sometimes one decision can change everything. Then his youngest child picked up the old metal badge that Daniel had kept as a reminder. "Dad, what does this symbol mean?" Daniel smiled. "It reminds me that we should never be afraid to ask questions." But just as he placed the badge back inside the toolbox, something caught his attention. There was a second compartment beneath the toolbox. Daniel had never noticed it before. He opened it. Inside was an old envelope. His name was written across it. Daniel's smile disappeared. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter from his father. Daniel read the first few lines. The letter explained that his father had always believed Daniel would one day become an electrician, not because someone forced him into it, but because he had noticed his son's natural curiosity from childhood. Then Daniel reached the final sentence. His hands began to shake. It said, "If you are reading this, then you have already discovered what I could not finish. But remember one thing, Mr. Kamau was never the only person I trusted." Daniel slowly looked toward the window. Across the street stood an elderly woman he had seen many times before. She was watching the house. When Daniel looked directly at her, she smiled. Then she turned and walked away. Daniel opened the envelope again. There was one final photograph inside. It showed his father, Mr. Kamau, and the elderly woman standing together many years earlier. On the back of the photograph were 4 words. "She knows everything, Daniel." Daniel stared through the window. His journey as an electrician had solved one mystery. But now he realized something even bigger. Perhaps the story had never really been about electricity. Perhaps it had always been about his father's unfinished legacy, and the one person who had been waiting all these years for Daniel to find her. And this time Daniel knew he would not walk away. He would find out the truth. Daniel stood at the window long after the elderly woman disappeared from view. The photograph in his hand felt heavier than it should have. For years he had believed his father's story had ended with his death. Now he realized there were still pieces of that story waiting to be understood. The next morning, Daniel went looking for the woman. He found her sitting quietly outside a small house near the old market. Her name was Mrs. Ada. She welcomed him without surprise, almost as if she had been expecting him. "You found the photograph," she said. Daniel stopped. "You knew I would come?" Mrs. Ada smiled. "Your father always said you were curious." Daniel sat beside her. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" "Because you were young," she replied. "And because your father wanted you to choose your own path." Daniel showed her the photograph. "Who were you to my father?" Mrs. Ada looked at the picture for a long moment. "I was his friend. I helped him understand what was happening with the electrical network. Mr. Kamau helped him with the technical side." Daniel finally understood why the 3 people had appeared together in the old photograph. His father had not been working alone. Mrs. Ada explained that years earlier, the town had suffered frequent power problems. Several private contractors were brought in to improve the system. At first, the work appeared successful. But eventually, strange connections began appearing between buildings. Daniel's father discovered that some of the work had never been properly documented. Instead of reporting everything immediately, he started collecting evidence. He wanted to make sure nobody could deny what had happened. But why did he stop? Daniel asked. "He didn't stop," Mrs. Ada said softly. "He became sick, and before he could finish, he passed away." Daniel lowered his eyes. "So the truth was never completed." "Exactly." Mrs. Ada handed him another envelope. "Your father asked me to keep this until you were old enough to understand." Inside were several handwritten pages. Daniel read them slowly. His father had written about responsibility, honesty, and learning a useful skill. He had written that an electrician's job was not simply about wires and switches. It was about protecting people. One sentence stayed with Daniel. Never be ashamed to begin again. The day you decide to learn is the day your future can change. Daniel wiped his eyes. Those words explained more than the mystery ever could. His father had not wanted him to become an electrician because of some unfinished investigation. He had wanted him to become someone who could stand on his own feet, solve problems, and help others. Daniel returned home with a peaceful feeling he had not experienced in months. He told Miriam everything. She listened quietly and then held his hand. Your father would be proud of you. Daniel smiled. I think he would. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Mr. Kamau worked with qualified professionals to make sure the remaining electrical systems in the town were safe. The old hidden connections were properly documented and removed where necessary. Buildings received inspections, damaged wiring was replaced, and customers finally received honest explanations about the problems they had experienced. Samuel also agreed to cooperate and provide the information he had about the old company. The mystery that had frightened the town slowly became a lesson. People learned that electrical work was not something to leave to unqualified hands. A hidden connection might look harmless, but poor electrical installation could create serious risks. Proper inspection, safe wiring, qualified electricians, and regular maintenance were essential. Daniel's business grew quickly. But he refused to become arrogant. He remembered the days when people had laughed at him. Instead of laughing back, he began teaching young people who wanted to learn the trade. Every Saturday, a small group gathered outside his workshop. Daniel taught them basic electrical safety, how to use tools properly, how to identify common problems, and most importantly, when to call a qualified professional. He always told them the same thing. Never be embarrassed because you don't know something. Be embarrassed only if you refuse to learn. The story of Daniel's unexpected career spread beyond McKenna. People loved the fact that he had simply woken up one morning and decided to change his life. But Daniel knew the truth was more meaningful than that. He had not become successful because everything suddenly became easy. He had succeeded because he kept learning when people doubted him. Months later, Daniel visited the old power station one final time. The building was being renovated and would soon become a community training center. He stood inside the room where he had first discovered the hidden records. There were no mysterious footsteps now. No secret messages. No strange symbols. Only sunlight coming through the windows. Mr. Kamau stood beside him. You changed this place, the older man said. Daniel shook his head. No. We all did. Mr. Kamau smiled. I should have told you the truth sooner. Daniel looked at him. I was angry with you. I know. But I understand now. Mr. Kamau nodded. Daniel had learned that people sometimes made mistakes because they were afraid. What mattered was whether they were willing to face those mistakes and make things right. Before leaving, Daniel looked at the old lightning bolt symbol carved into the metal cabinet. He no longer saw it as a warning. He saw it as a reminder. A reminder of how one unexpected decision had changed his life. A reminder of his father. A reminder that knowledge should be used to help people, not to frighten or deceive them. That evening, Daniel returned home to find Miriam and the children waiting outside. His youngest child ran toward him. Daddy, are you an electrician forever? Daniel laughed. I think so. The child smiled. Good. Our lights won't go off anymore. Everyone laughed. Daniel looked at his family and felt grateful. He had started with almost nothing except determination. He had faced doubt, discovered a mystery, uncovered his father's unfinished story, and helped his community become safer. But the greatest thing he had gained was not money or popularity. It was confidence. He had learned that starting over was not failure. Sometimes, starting over was exactly what a person needed. The customers who once doubted him now trusted him. The young people he trained saw him as a mentor. His children saw him as an example. And every time Daniel picked up his electrician's toolbox, he remembered that ordinary morning when he had made one simple decision. He had decided to learn something new. That decision changed everything. So if there was one lesson Daniel wanted people to remember, it was this. Never believe that your life is finished simply because your first plan did not work. You can learn a new skill. You can change direction. You can begin again. Daniel's story began with a decision that made everyone laugh. But years later, those same people understood something they had missed. The man they thought was simply starting over was actually building a new future. And sometimes, all it takes is one brave decision to turn an ordinary morning into the beginning of an extraordinary life. Daniel switched on the lights in his workshop, smiled at the warm glow filling the room, and quietly whispered the words he had learned from his father. Never be afraid to begin again. Then he closed the door and walked home. This time there were no mysteries waiting for him. Only tomorrow. And Daniel was ready for it.